there's like 50, by some estimates, and these are higher, $55 trillion that passes each year that is not taxed under the estate tax that should be, or that would have been under the $1 million, or that is not taxed through loopholes. If that was captured at 40%, that's like $20 trillion, right? Our deficit is like $4 trillion.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Before You Speak podcast. I am your host, Derek Peterson, just processing the fire hose of my news feed with this guy over there.
What's up, everybody? I am Elwin, and hey, the fire hose of my news feed is filled with people arguing over whether or not Taller Rico is a vegan.
Yeah, I wasn't his response to that was like, I'm from Texas and I eat barbecue pretty regularly.
He said, I'm an 8th generation Texan. If all they have on me is that I had a potato, egg, and cheese taco, fucking whatever.
So this is all coming from that one sound clip that Trump was like, is he a dude? This is just, it is case in point that this is becoming more and more of a cult. If we're arguing over whether Taller Rico is a vegan because Trump said he was, like, my God, like, all right.
Did you hear the nickname they have for him?
For Taller Rico?
Yeah.
No.
Talafrico.
I mean, there could be worse. Like,
I mean, okay, look.
I wish my nickname was something in regards to that.
They came out of the gate swinging with Talafrico. He's a vegan and he thinks God is non-binary. It's like, you know what? We got a shot. We've got a shot here.
Also, if anybody has proof that God is binary, let me know. All right, because I would love to see your evidence, your physical evidence of such. So,
can you imagine if God was like some ancient Roman senator who was having, it's like blasphemy, orgies with little boys and little girls? Oh my God, I'm going to be stricken down. Can you imagine if somehow somebody proved that?
Dude, then I think we're all just my preference would be hell. All right,
we are 2 minutes and 9 seconds in, and I have taken this off the rails. Fucking great.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Owen. Well, I guess we can only go up from here as far as news goes. So speaking of terrible human beings and potential pedophiles, let's talk about Paxton winning the Texas primary. So not only that, in a potential landslide too. Apparently Cornyn didn't have a shot, which the best thing that could happen for anybody in this situation is that Cornyn still runs as an independent, which would be fantastic.
He won't.
I know he won't, because but it would be a huge FU to the party if he did, because he would definitely take some votes from Paxton, because there are going to be some Texans, not all. Anyone that believes Taller Rico is a vegan is in the same camp that Paxton is a good human. So, but yeah, other than that, I think most people, I mean, since I've lived in Texas, even my Republican counterparts have not been big on Paxton.
No, I mean, he's a completely odious piece of shit who was overwhelmingly impeached on a bipartisan basis. The vote was like 120-8 or 120-28. It was a landslide to impeach him. His fucking ex-wife, his estranged wife, voted to impeach him. He is... You cannot possibly be more corrupt than Ken Paxton is. It's been proven many times over. He's been sued and indicted for corruption. I don't even think he denies it anymore. I think his mugshot is like one of the worst looking mugshots ever, because he's just smirking like, yeah, whatever. I do all this. So he's just a terrible, terrible person. But right now, you're either with Trump or you're against Trump, and Cornyn had too much history of being against Trump. I don't think Trump endorsed Paxton for any like principled reason, except that he saw an opportunity to notch a win. He saw Paxton's going to win. I'm going to endorse, and it's going to go. The polls are going to go from 53-47 to 63-37. But either way, it's a win, and he can take credit for the win. But the question here, I saw a post on Threads yesterday with somebody. It was a video of a voter saying, that how much he hated Paxton and he voted for Cornyn and he wouldn't be able to vote for Paxton and all this stuff. And that was kind of a sub thread where the primary post was like, yeah, this is nice to hear and all that, but like 91% or something of Cornyn voters are going to vote for Paxton. And I initially read that and I was like, God damn it. And I was like, no, no, no. Of course the Cornyn voters are going to vote for Paxton. We know the Cornyn voters are going to vote for Paxton. The Cornyn voters, the Republican primary voters, are not the guys who are going to switch and vote for Taller Rico. And any
Yeah.
analysis that starts with that is flawed because of that single fact alone. The question is the Latinos in South Texas. The question is new voters voting, people who are voting for the first or second time, young voters who are not entrenched in their partisanship. Where do they go? And there are enough of those to swing this election without a doubt. Uh,
Yeah. I think you're correct. I think a lot of the people that are disheartened by our current state of affairs were not voting in the primary. Meaning, like, I don't think that they were out voting for Cornyn or Paxton. I think most of those people are probably like, yeah, I'm sitting this one out. And that's what'll be interesting, is just to see like the amount of people that decide to sit out. Does that actually impact does that move the needle at all for the people that actually show up to vote? And do enough people show up to vote to flip the script when it comes to November, and we're figuring this stuff out? Which, and then there's the real question is, has Elon Musk messed with all of our voting
yeah,
machines? If there's there's also a world where just everything turns red in a landslide, and we're like, were our voting machines actually messed with this time?
yeah,
Because
yeah. I mean, that's
Doge,
just Doge.
what?
I think that we have to remember in any sort of time we're talking about this, the people who vote in primaries are partisan by nature. You're pretty
Yeah,
plugged in if you're voting in a primary. And the March primary in Texas had extremely high voter turnout considering it's a primary. The runoff had the highest runoff turnout in like decades, but was below the March primary. So it's not, I think when we're looking at the primary votes, it's not, are all these voters going to turn out and vote, are any of them going to vote outside of their party line? I think you have to assume that they all will turn out and that they all will vote according to their party line. But it's not those voters that will swing the election. It's the
yeah,
ones who don't vote in the primary because they don't know what's going on or they don't understand it, or they're like, oh, I'll go today. And then something happens and they don't go and they don't go. And the next thing you know, they forgot about it because they don't really give a shit and nobody's talking about it as much. Those are the voters that matter. And I think that those are the voters who are more amenable to hearing about just how corrupt Paxton is and tying him to exactly the type of sort of, the billionaires are corrupt, the powerful are corrupt, and they're all lining up against you in underhanded ways and in open ways. And this guy is just one of the same. I think there's a real lane there.
yeah. God, we're in a mess, bro. Well,
Before
like,
we
and
before we move on from the
oh,
primary in Texas, I wanted to talk about this San Antonio Democratic House runoff, where the woman who won the primary in March but did not get 50% plus one, so they had to go in a runoff, was like a progressive lefty candidate running against this guy Johnny Garcia. Her name is Maureen Galindo. This guy's Johnny Garcia. He used to be a sheriff's deputy, endorsed by the DNC establishment. Well, came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago that this woman Galindo is a complete fucking freak nut job who had said things like, "I believe there should be internment camps for American Zionists," and that got everybody all fired up. She said a bunch of other crazy, terrible stuff too. AOC, the whole Democratic establishment was like, nope, nope, oh my God, they disavowed immediately. They did the right thing. But it also
yeah,
came out that she was largely funded by a dark money Republican far right group to try and
interesting.
beat. the guy who, you know, has a shot in the San Antonio district that's, I think, majority Hispanic. Now they have a Hispanic former sheriff's deputy running. Yep, it was one of the redistricted gerrymandered county or districts. But, you know, it was like a Trump plus 12. The new district would have gone Trump plus 12. That's not an easy swing, but we've seen swings of plus 15, plus 20 the other
Yep.
way. So certainly that one's in play. And also, by the way, the Cook political report on the Senate, when Paxton won, immediately shifted Texas from likely R to lean R.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, fingers crossed. But the amount of bigotry and racism in Texas never ceases to amaze me. So I will not be shocked if we still are a full red state at the end of all of this. But
Yeah.
fingers crossed that we're not. At least till the Republican Party gets back to having an iota of morality, then we'll discuss you know, how I feel about the party again. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the DOJ because this slush fund stuff is not going away. It's starting to sound like it might actually be not very like not what Trump maybe thought it was. And you're like, dude, I saw Megyn Kelly talking about how terrible this was. Like you know, we're continually seeing more and more criticism from the talking heads on the right about some of this stuff. And a lot of it's virtually depressing because, like, you know, the thought of my tax dollars going to pay for some of these J6ers, uh, like lifestyles, that makes me want to fight somebody because like that will drive me absolutely bonkers. So like what's your take on what's going on with the DOJ right now? Because Todd Blanche does not I mean, this dude is probably getting arrested after all this is done because that's how awful all this shit is.
I mean, it's worth always noting that Todd Blanche was Donald Trump's personal defense attorney. Like,
Yep.
not he's acting as his personal defense attorney. Oh, this sort of seems like the DOJ is being used as Trump's law firm. Todd Blanche was actually his attorney, and now
Yeah.
he's in charge of the DOJ. Uh, you know, it does seem like Republicans, this is too much for them. They left town for a couple weeks rather than take a vote on this because they didn't have the votes.
Yeah.
So once they learned they didn't have the votes, Mike Johnson was like, "Okay, session over. Let's get the hell out of here." Um, so you know the DOJ kind of trying to
So now
push
they
this
go
on.
I was gonna say, so now they're gonna go find a Democrat that's ready to retire and give them a bunch of the money from the slush fund to get them to vote their
Yeah,
way.
that's right.
They need they need another Fetterman.
Yeah, or they'll find, you know, any one of these Republicans who looks at the primaries and is like, "Oh my God, I could lose to the craziest person on the planet," like a Thomas Massey. See if you know the next Thomas Massey can be bought. Um, but you know, in DOJ news this week, the thing that was most interesting to me is I've touched on this before, but their rank incompetence. Uh, so back when ICE was going crazy earlier in the year in Chicago, there was a demonstration outside of a detention facility in Chicago called the Broadview Detention Facility. And it made pretty big news because there's a woman who was running in the primary for Congress in Illinois who was one of the ones who was arrested. Turned out 6 people were arrested, and they've dubbed themselves in progressive circles as the Broadview Six. Well, the case against them was dismissed by the judge when she read the grand jury transcripts. And what was found in the grand jury transcripts was just like super bonkers awful. Where you know you're in a grand jury, you have to present evidence, and the bar is pretty low to get an indictment. But like one of the things that every attorney who's ever done a grand jury knows is you can't say, "Trust me on this, guys." You know, like, "Oh, you got a bunch of questions, just trust me." These folks need to go to trial. They're guilty. You can't do that, right? And that is what they did in this. And the first time it went up for an indictment, they didn't get the indictment, so they immediately kicked out the people who voted against the indictment and brought it up for another vote with the people who voted for it. And the U.S. attorney who was there, like, went into the break room and gave them all his cards and said, "Hey, if you have any questions, call me." All this shit that's just completely out of bounds. Like you just cannot do it. Uh, and the junior U.S. attorney who was on it, when they were being read the riot act by the judge last week, was like, "Well, this was my boss who did this and my boss who did that." Uh, so, and this is where like my brain exploded. The fucking boss was working at the time until last Friday when they fired her for Dick Durbin, Democratic Senator's Senate Judiciary Committee. The Democratic Senate Judiciary Committee was employing the senior DOJ attorney who had violated every single rule of grand jury conduct in order to get indictments against liberal protesters. So it's just like total incompetence with a side of corruption.
I hate it all, bro. This is so. Was that Kat Abu
Yeah.
Ghazali or whatever her
Yep.
name is? That was the situation. Yeah, they accused them of like attacking an officer for while they were protesting, which there was like a scrape on his car or something. He was driving, and they
Yeah.
were like, there was some that whole thing, and then isn't there also a term for what they were doing where they try
Vouching.
to vouching? Yeah, I was listening to Strict Scrutiny the other day, and they were talking about that a little bit, and the term vouching came up. I was like, "That's an actual legal term." I was like, because I vouch for my friends all the time.
Yeah.
Turns out,
That
it's legalese.
best thing about Kat Abu Ghazaleh, I think that's how you pronounce
Yeah.
her name. Do you know who her husband is? Or
No.
fiance? I don't think they're married. He is the guy who owns The Onion.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, like 4 or 5 years ago, he bought The Onion. So he is also the guy because The Onion bought InfoWars, Alex Jones's website, out of
It is the best
bankruptcy.
thing ever. Yes, it
Yeah,
is the
so
best.
that's her fiance. So he's all over this shit in a great way. Like they do a great job. Uh, but yeah,
Dude, have you ever seen Stephen Colbert's impersonation of Alex Jones? The bit he did on oh dude, I'll have to it is fantastic. One day you have to watch that. He was I think the original it was his name I can't remember the character's name, but it was like Tuck something. It's hilarious. Worth watching and pulling up old clips of on YouTube, which now I will be doing later today so I can send them all to you.
there you go.
So, well, okay. So today we're going to talk about something that most people hate talking about. Uh, taxes, and the wealth inequality when it comes to taxes, because this is something that has been coming up more and more, throughout, especially as of late, like there's a general discord, I think, amongst people, and they're looking at billionaires and, taxing the wealthy. And so, over the last couple weeks, I've been looking into it and reading up a little bit more about, like how does the tax system actually benefit the wealthy? And so I think there's a couple things that we should start off with just to kind of, you know, basic understanding of some of the tax stuff that's going on. So first, the difference between a marginal and effective tax rate. Marginal tax rate is just where is your next what's your next dollar going to be taxed at, because not everything is taxed the same, and furthermore you're not taxed on something you haven't made yet. So if you're in the lowest tax bracket, but you're about to move up a tax bracket, then that's where your marginal rate would come in. Your effective tax rate is what you everything that you've earned, so your overall tax bracket minus your deductions, credits, etc. So in most situations what we're actually talking about is the effective tax rate. So with that being kind of explained, I think also probably important to know, so people that earn under 50K a year, their effective tax rate is usually between nothing, 0 to like 8%. If you are in the 75 to 200K range, your effective tax rate is usually between 10 and 20%. These are very vague numbers, by the way. And then if you're in the upper to middle high earners, so anywhere from 250 to a million, your effective tax rate is typically between 20 and 30%. And then once we get into the ultra wealthy, that goes bonkers because it can be all over the place depending on how they structure their taxes and who is doing their taxes. So I guess let's start here. Elwin, is our tax system fair for everybody?
No. No.
Case
Are we done?
closed.
Are we done?
Yeah,
Okay,
we're done.
cool. Um,
So that's enough talk about taxes.
yeah. No, I think that there's a couple of important things in there. One, I believe it is a progressive taxation system where you have lower rates, lower statutory rates. I think what you were just going through was kind of the effective rate. But we have lower statutory rates at lower income levels, and the more you make, the higher your marginal rate goes up. I believe that's fair. And I'm going to divert for a second because one of the absolute brain buster arguments that I hear is a bit against higher marginal tax rates is like, I'm not going to start a company because I don't want to pay a 50% tax rate if I'm making $1 million a year. And I'm like, motherfucker, you are so far away from making $1 million a year. That's not the reason anybody decides to not start a company.
And I've never met a single person that, that was in that camp.
Yeah, like I've heard that
The
it's
flip
like this
side of
academic argument used by low tax by Republicans and no tax type conservatives who are like, this stifles innovation because nobody's going to want to start a boomingly successful company because they don't want to get to the point where $1,000,001 is taxed at a 3% higher rate than $999,999.99. It's
yeah.
it's insane. It's insane that anybody buys that argument, but they do. So in general, I think that the marginal tax structure, a progressive tax structure that we have, is fair, and I think that it's important to note that, like when you talked about the effective tax rates, they're all less than the marginal tax rate because there are a number of deductions that almost everybody takes. So, somebody who makes 82,000 a year, 80,000 a year without kids is probably going to have a higher effective tax rate than someone who makes $80,000 a year with kids because the person with kids can take the child tax credit.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's going to reduce their effective tax rate. So there's stuff built in there, but to me, as you get more and more income, you start to have available to you more and more deductions or credits or access to tax attorneys that will find deductions and credits or the ability to create trusts or business partnerships or charitable foundations or anywhere along the line. Uh, you, like we talked earlier today, the car you have for your real estate business, right? It had to be a certain size in order to get a certain tax benefit. And that's not saying you have to spend X on a car to get the tax benefit, but larger cars cost more. So if you don't have
And
the money to buy the bigger car, you don't have access to that tax benefit. And I think that there's a lot of little loopholes, or they're not loopholes, but credits and deductions along the way as you go up into the, let's say, the $600,000 range that are not available to you until you have enough money to buy something, to spend, to pay to play, and get
yeah.
that tax benefit.
Yeah, and you're not wrong because the more expensive car that I purchased, the higher the tax write off was, which was actually for me a very calculated setup. Like I knew how much I needed to write off to drop my tax bracket, so I was paying less in taxes via my tax guy, and I went out and purchased a car that hit those numbers. So to make sure I was optimizing my tax bill, which, was within the, which isn't within the realm of everything is okay, meaning like I wasn't doing anything shady. I'm following the tax law, but it's, yeah, the tax law in this situation benefited me. And that's largely because the year prior to that, I wrote a check to the IRS that was more than I'd ever paid for a car in the first place. So yeah, once you've done that a couple times, you're like, oh, and then you also realize too, and it's not, it hurts to write checks to the IRS it hurts more writing checks to the IRS knowing that my money is going to a J6er and a piece of shit. So like there is like how that money is spent actually matters. And so with progressive tax, restructuring and reform, which is something I hope we get into in coming in future administrations, and I hope that a lot of the people that are running on this platform of taxing the wealthy, if you get into office, I hope and pray that all of this stuff actually starts to pan out, because over the last 40 years, our Congress has not closed one single loophole in the tax code. There's been more and more created, and Democrats uh, are not innocent in all of this, because Democrats have been in power for a number of years where there was plenty of opportunity to start to close some of this stuff up. So I think that's also important to note that, yeah, like this, it benefits those in power at the moment. And I think it's important to note that as we talk about solutions and things in the future, it's critical that we're voting for people that are willing to vote against their own personal interest in all of this.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's their own personal interest. I mean, not every member of Congress is rich. I think it's just who are willing to not listen to the lobbyists, because the lobbying groups are the ones with the money. Uh, and they're the ones, the more, I think what drives people crazy to me about what drives me crazy about the tax structure. There was a time 10 or 11 years ago when I was in sales and I had a particularly good one, like really big sale. And my bonus on it was, a lot. And we knew right away that we would have to take 50% of that bonus and put it
Hmm.
away to pay our taxes. And, it was close to six figures. It was an incredible amount of taxes to pay. And my thought was, why the fuck do I have to pay this? Other people who get this, like rich people, there's no way they're paying 50% on this. They're finding some way to not pay it. And I think that is what most of the people feel, right? So there's a lot of stuff, to go back to kind of the pay to play thing. you know, you can get a tax credit for replacing the windows in your house and putting in energy efficient windows. You have to buy the windows. You have to pay for the windows to get the tax credit, and it's not dollar for dollar. Yes, it reduces your taxable income, but you still have to have the money to buy the windows. When there was a federal EV tax credit, you have to buy the EV in order to get the tax credit. If you want the 401k deduction, you have to work for a company that's giving you a 401k or a 401k match. All of these, and 50% of the country doesn't have that. 50% of the country doesn't have retirement funds. So I think that in the lobbying and in the increasing complexity of our tax code, therein lies the built-in unfairness, and it's not an accident, right? It is completely it's a feature, not a bug. That the more opaque you make this, it benefits the wealthy, because one, they obtain knowledge through experience about ways to get around this stuff, and two, they have the money to pay for the best tax attorneys, whereas you or I, or the couple making $80,000, they're going to H&R Block or downloading TurboTax and just plugging that shit in. They've already paid their taxes. Their taxes come out of the W-2. You're hoping for a refund, right? A refund is a money because you've overpaid your taxes. So I think there's just this, people see it very clearly. Like, why do the wealthy get away with paying so little when they have so much? And it leads to stupid policy discussions, but the core of the rot is honest and true, I think.
Agreed. Yeah, and like we hear the argument all the time, right? Is that the top 1% pay 40% of the taxes? So I know we've talked a little bit about that, but explain that.
Yeah, so it's that stat is true. But it's also a little bit misleading, because if you were to drill down beyond the top 1% and go into like the top tenth of 1%, you start to see that in that delta, in that point 0.9 that I've eliminated are a lot of people who are making 300, 400, $500,000 a year. They're doctors, surgeons, lawyers. They're making great money. Like, this is not to weep for them at all, but they are paying 40 to 50%, right? They don't have enough yet to set up a charitable foundation or to set up a partnership. And yes, they can take advantage of a bunch of shit that I just described that somebody making 150 can't. They can put new windows in their house. Maybe they can buy a vacation house and take Airbnb it and take some tax credits there. But the nut of it is they're still working down from like a 50% marginal rate or a 50% effective rate when their tax bills are all added up. So yeah, the top 1% do pay 40% of the taxes, but the people who are screaming that stat out are not the $500,000 a year doctor. They're the $30 million a year hedge fund partner. They're the tech bros. They're the people who are able to take their money and structure it in a way that they pay very, very little effective tax rate. Uh, so they use this as a cover. They use that stat as a canard to say, no, look, I'm in the top 1% and we pay 40% of the taxes. They're bootstrapping their own, ability to fight for low taxes on the backs of everybody who actually is paying a high tax rate. It's why
Yep.
Jeff Bezos has an annual salary on the books of $82,000. Why Warren Buffett has an annual W-2 salary of $82,000, because they pay a little bit and then they get that tax rate and everything else is structured in a way that they don't have to pay taxes. And that, I think, is why that stat, while true, is a little bit misleading and certainly used to make an argument that that stat does not support.
Correct. Yeah. I think that's exactly correct because, we're talking about the top 1% here are the earners that we're talking about. We're talking about the top 1% of earners that are paying the top 40% of taxes. And this gets into a bigger question because if you are an earner, that means, in my opinion, you are contributing to society. You are out working, you are active, you are bringing in income, you are running businesses, you are doing something most likely labor intensive to some degree. So we're taxing labor far more than we're taxing assets because once you get to a certain point, once you get to that, 10, 20, 30 million, 100 million, you're in a different place, right? And what's happening there is the loophole that's been created and figured out is that there is a bunch of people that will lend you money against secured assets. So if you have a fantastic stock portfolio that you can borrow against that stock portfolio and find lenders at interest rates that are far below what market value is and essentially live on a calculated loss. And then furthermore, they're writing off the interest on the loans that they're borrowing against to basically pay themselves a salary. And sometimes in different situations, just opening new loans to pay the previous loan off and starting again. And this is where I think Americans and people like me, as I'm starting to unpack some of this stuff, I'm like, yeah, like, dude, this sucks. I'm getting effectively taxed. And in my good years, I'm in the highest tax bracket. So I'm giving up somewhere between 30 and 50% of my income depending on the year that I'm having. And dude, it hurts. It's the difference between us buying a bigger house. It's the difference between us buying an investment property. It's the difference between us getting that car that I want and I don't want. And granted, like, those are good problems for me to have and I'm not complaining about that, but yeah, but then you look at the lifestyle of, like, once you get over that hump and your assets are you've accumulated enough assets to then borrow against, this is where things get really dangerous. And furthermore, and I want to talk a little bit about the estate tax as well, because I think one of my biggest fears is, uh, we're about to step into a situation where there was a lot of earners that built wealth to get themselves into these, tax brackets where they can do this, and they're about to hand their money down to their children, who have lived a lifestyle that has made them fucking terrible human beings, who are then going to take over and inherit all of that money. And in my opinion, this is going to become a huge issue for us in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, I think so as we shift into the estate tax and gift tax, mostly estate tax, uh, I think it's important to go back and say, like, well, what is the income tax what is the theory? What is the crux of an income tax? The crux of an income tax is that as you receive income as a member of society, you pay taxes on that income so that we can have roads and airports and, a society, a military. If you love the military and you want them to have $1.5 trillion, uh, you can get income from any number of ways. And one of the ways that you can get income is, of course, having a job. But another way that a lot of people, if not most people, that's probably not most, but certainly a really high percentage of people realize income at one point in their lives is through an inheritance. Their parents die, their favorite uncle dies and gives them some money. Uh, well, okay, so that is income. And we have an estate tax to tax that income. And we've also structured that estate tax originally to recognize that some amount of the money that an estate is worth should be exempt from taxation. So if you have, you know, if my mother dies, I hope she doesn't die. Knocking on wood, okay. But so if she dies, she has a condo in Florida and some stock, right? Let's say that's worth $1 million total. Uh, and she gives 500,000 to my sister and 500,000 to me. She splits it evenly. Well, there's a policy choice in there to say, okay, you know, you want people to be able to pass on money to their kids. They have earned that money. Uh, we don't want kids to be burdened with a huge tax bill that they can't necessarily pay because maybe that is in the house the money is in the house that gets sold. So we have exemptions under a number at which estates do not have to pay estate tax. And for a long time, that was around $1 million, and then it went up to 3 million. Now it's $15 million per person, so $30 million for a family, under which no estate tax is paid. Okay. So, you'd have to think then, what does it take to have an estate worth 30 million? It takes a lot. It takes an awful
A
lot.
lot.
You're talking multiple houses. You're talking investments at the time that you die, assets, maybe art or whatever. You're talking a lot of shit to get above that 30 million. You're talking about a lot of shit to get above 20 million, but at 20 million, you're exempt. And the rate on that is like 40%. So there is a ton of money that is being lost by giving such a high estate tax exemption number. And that was part of the big, beautiful tax bill from last year, that raising it to 30 million. So there are, by some estimates, 450x our total GDP available in unrealized estate tax gains. There's like 50, by some estimates, and these are higher, $55 trillion that passes each year that is not taxed, that under the estate tax that should be, or that would have been under the $1 million, or that is not taxed through loopholes. If that was captured at 40%, that's like $20 trillion, right? Our deficit is like 4 trillion. I talked earlier about that I believe a progressive tax policy is inherently fair. Uh, I think so. I think it's
Yeah.
more fair than a flat tax, which disproportionately affects those at the lower incomes. So an
Yep.
estate tax that's progressive is also, fair in principle, and there are ways to, you just don't want to burden somebody who inherits a house with the tax hit of selling that house, right? You want them to have the benefit of the money that they've worked for. But within that, one of the biggest giveaways is when somebody dies, their property, let's say the house, steps up in basis. And what that means is, if you live in Lost Creek in Austin and you bought a house in 1975 for $180,000, and now that house is worth 1.6 million. Okay. Uh, when you die and your kids inherit that house, the basis on that house is 1.6 million. They don't have to pay any gains. They don't have, there's no tax on the gains between 1.5, the 150 that it originally cost, and the 1.6. It's like because of the exemption in part. So should there be a step up in basis? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I understand that you want to bequeath a house, but like there's an awful lot of money to be gained there, and it is a realization event. If that house gets sold, the heirs have realized income. And we treat the estate tax in particular through just the genius of rich people's political messaging, right? It's called the death tax. Of course, no one wants to pay a death tax. I was taxed when I was alive. Now I'm going to be taxed when I'm dead. Yeah, you know what? You're not being taxed, but above a certain level, your heirs can afford to pay an income tax on their income. The money they just got is income. And it was just, you sent me that podcast by Scott Galloway where the tax expert was talking about this. The numbers are staggering in the amount of money that's there to be claimed, and also the effectiveness of the we don't want a death tax lobby, because about 20 years ago there were something like 165,000 households a year that would be subject to estate tax. Their estates fell above the exemption, fell above the $1,000,000, $750,000 exemption, whatever it was at the time. Now there are 1,900 estates that get estate tax at all. That is by design. That is, and they don't want to eliminate the estate tax because they use it for a billion different loopholes that benefit them in ways beyond not paying taxes when they're dead. They
Yep.
use it for generations, for DRAPs and CUPERTs and all these like things that I don't understand what they are, but they're all ways to structure trusts and partnerships and foundations and buy assets that aren't going to be taxed. And they need all that, and all that sits in the estate tax law.
And this is where the frustration of people is at right now with the whole rhetoric of like we need to tax billionaires, right? Because it stems from these kind of statistics that we end up learning about where we're like, oh, there's all of this money that is being left untaxed on the table from the wealthy. And our tax dollars, meanwhile, we're being told universal health care is out of reach. Universal child care is out of reach. We can't pay our teachers more. Our public school system in Texas, particularly, is getting run into the ground. Like all of these things that our roads in most states are shit. Like the infrastructure of our country is, and we're constantly being told we don't have the money. We don't have the money. We don't have the money. And meanwhile, what we're learning is that, oh, the money is there. It just depends on what circles you run in. And because if you're if you run a business that's government adjacent and you have access to government contracts and government funds, you're probably going to make a lot of money. Meanwhile, if you run in the right circles and you know how to, the the additional the tax code used to be like 400 or 500 pages, and now it's over 4,000 pages. So the additional 3,600 pages of the tax code benefits somebody, and it's likely not the people that run in our circles, because, like I remember a couple years ago when my grandpa passed away, and my mom inherited a very small amount from my grandpa. To be honest, with the amount of shit she put up with, it should have been a lot more. But dude, her tax guy forced her to set a huge chunk of that aside, even still, to because it was a healthy chunk of it was still going to face income tax for my mom when she took it on, and obviously she's working with a CPA that didn't understand all of the ways in which she could funnel that money to specific places to write it off. So it's like, yeah, dude, you're absolutely constrained by your ability to your knowledge and information, but furthermore also the amount of money that you're inheriting, it allows you different options and your ability to hide it, because the more money that's out there is the easier it is, which is insane, but the easier it is to move it to assets or somewhere else where it can't be touched by the government. And these are the kind of things that, after hearing that Congress has not closed a tax loophole in almost 40 years, I'm like, yeah, like this speaks foundationally to the problem and why people don't trust our government on either side. And look, Republicans right now are the ones that are making this blaringly obvious. The corruption that's going on right now in front of our eyes is insane, but we'd be remiss to say that this, like that even when Democrats were in power, that the shit was not changing for the better. So standing on the moral high ground that we should just tax billionaires to do everything. And it's, that Jeff Bezos, did you hear the clips of that Jeff Bezos interview when he was talking about it?
Bonkers. Bonkers.
Yeah, he comes across like a complete asshole. But the flip side of that, the sentiment that I genuinely kind of agree with him is that Jeff Bezos' tax dollars doesn't move the needle on just about anything in our country, because we have a bigger problem of how we spend our tax dollars and who's in control of them. And that also needs to be addressed. And so it's a twofold on some of this stuff, but like with a more progressive tax system, in my opinion, that needs to go hand in hand with with what are we doing with that money? Because like that also matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, you can't fix the type of deficit that we have by only focusing on one side. So yes,
Yeah.
you have to increase revenue. You also have to decrease spending. But I think that, you know, and you're right that nobody has fixed it in decades. And I think at the heart of it, the most salient point that you made was it used to be 400 pages, now it's 3,600 pages. Because tax reform now, I think, is just a disguise for increasing tax complexity. And Lisa she has an LLM in tax, which is basically one level above a law degree. So it's a master's in tax law. So she's worked with ultra high net worth clients. She's worked with firms that deal with this stuff. She's really quite smart when it comes to structuring people's money in a way that it helps them to avoid taxes. And it's all legal, right? There's no shame or
Yeah.
shade about it. It's legal. My cousin did it for corporations. Uh, I asked her what the problem was with what her number one sort of gripe about the tax code was, and she said it's too complicated right away. She's like, that number one answer, it is too complicated. She's like, I have wealthy clients who don't understand it. Their tax attorneys don't understand it. People at the lower end don't understand that you can get tax breaks for new windows or for HSA spending, or, that there's a million tax breaks out there that people simply don't know because it is so complex. And I think that's right. And I think that it is a feature, not a bug, because you you don't want to be a billionaire running around saying I shouldn't pay any taxes. No one is gonna no one is gonna support that. They're gonna be like, fuck you, pay some fucking taxes. I pay taxes. Uh, but if you're a billionaire who on the one side is talking about, oh, our tax system is unfair, it needs reform, and on the other side you're talking to your senator, uh, and you're saying, yeah, reform this, but reform it in a way that provides all these additional loopholes for me. Well, now you got something. Right now, that billionaire is like, yeah, cool, I'm in. And I think that's what Jeff Bezos, like, I think that's ultimately his play. So it's like, would that help? Would doubling his taxes help a single teacher in Queens? I don't know. I have no idea. And I'm not going to argue too much with somebody who says probably not. Our tax money is spent wastefully. but I am certainly going to be in the camp of people saying, shut up, Bezos, and let us try. Why don't you give
Correct.
us the money since you can afford it and let us
Yep.
try? I would certainly be in that camp.
Yeah, and we've touched base on this a few times now, but I think it's important. Like, I'm not one that I'm like, man, billionaires shouldn't exist. I've not been in that camp because I think it's, as somebody that grew up relatively poor and has fought my ass off to try to not try to generationally change that for my kids, hopefully, and hopefully to use some of these, hopefully to have enough that I can leave some money to my kids when I'm old and gone, and that some of these, tax policies impact my kids in a positive way. I still genuinely believe that getting to a billionaire status and maintaining it should be much harder than it is. And there needs to be more, taxable events on capital at a certain point and at a certain wealth category, because what's going on now is basically allowing the we're allowing the wealth disparity, the wealth gap in our country to grow so increasingly fast at this moment, where you get into the upper tax bracket and your wealth accumulates at a pace that is unlike anything else, compared to the amount of work it takes to get there is becoming more and more unreasonably difficult. And so the gap between these two things needs to be closed, and I think that has to come through policy, and it has to come from electing people to Congress that are going to vote against the vote against being just in
Bought.
general wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, being bought.
Well, I
I
don't.
guess that's the right
I,
way to say it.
I understand the appeal of abolish billionaires. Billionaires shouldn't exist. You know, and I think it exists for two reasons. One, you have a lot of billionaires right now who are complete twat waffles.
Yes.
Who are just
Twat waffle.
uh,
That's a good one.
yeah, uh, they're just terrible people. So people are like, Elon Musk is just a terrible person, and he shouldn't exist. With it, someone with his wealth shouldn't exist. Jeff Bezos is a terrible person. Someone with it, like, I get that, but it lacks nuance in every way. It's just a function of anger and frustration. And I also do believe, like, look, if you are hardworking enough and fortunate enough to become a billionaire, congratulations. You
Hmm.
know, don't turn into an awful person. Uh, but yeah, to some extent, you have you need to pay your share
Yeah.
and not have a way to reduce your share. You know, it's like one of the things Warren Buffett does, which is like a little bit hypocritical. Is like, it's not fair that my secretary pays, has a higher effective tax rate than I do. Well, then change the law, man. You know,
Yeah.
you can get people to
Being
change the law.
The problem is that once you get to that level, there is it takes a very unique human to actually vote against their own interests or push to change things against their interests. I think I've heard one person actively speak towards it, which was, I've heard Mark Cuban at times talk about, different things in regards to this. But yeah, like, there, my hope is for the future that our tax code does change in a way, because look, if you are collectively have $1 billion, you can live a life unlike just about anybody on the face of this planet. And if you are getting taxed beyond that at an extremely high rate, and there are more taxable events to extract chunks of your wealth, like, I'm sorry, but like, yeah, like, there comes a point where there's an amount of wealth that is completely unnecessary, and not only that, like, yeah, it it causes people to become terrible fucking human beings. And that's just historically true, you know.
To
Wealth
me,
despair.
like, a dream would be to have enough money that I can live off of the interest, right?
Mhm.
So if I have $2 million in liquid assets, and I can confidently invest and get a 10% return on that, then I have $200,000 a year to live on if I just,
Yeah.
live off the interest or the returns on my principal. And, if you have $1 billion, you could put that money in a 3% CD, and your annual income is $30 million. And I promise you that those people make more than $30 million in a couple weeks. That.
Correct. Yeah, this is
So
what I'm talking this is what I'm talking about. Wealth builds more wealth, correct? And so like, yeah, there needs to be more taxable events to prevent things from getting out of control. And, we're running short on time, so I don't want to get into it, but the flip side of it is that, this all connects through these people using their wealth to then change policy, and the Citizens United case all bleeds into this because they can spend unlimited amounts of money to do so. So yeah, until we end up going down the path where we are committed to actually changing this, this gap is going to get wider and wider, faster and faster. And the worst part is like the next generation of people to inherit this wealth is worse than the generation that's currently controlling it. So
yeah,
we've got that to look forward to as well. So
and that's why people are out there with pitchforks,
yeah.
torches and pitchforks, going after the billionaires, because they're just like, this is so unfair. No one's fixing it. Clearly, the only thing we can do is burn the whole fucking thing down.
And and Democrats, if you're listening, there's some stuff to be learned here as far as running what you're running on in the next few years. So, well, with that being said, who are we telling to shut the fuck up today, Elwin? This
New
is my
York
favorite
Knicks
part, by the way.
fans. Yeah, New York Knicks fans.
Yes. You know how much I hate the New York Knicks?
Just like they are out of their brains right now. Out of their brains. And I used to be a Knicks fan when I was younger, and now I'm like meh about basketball in general. Like, I'm actively rooting against the Knicks so that their fans can suffer. Uh, and I don't know why. I don't really have a good reason, except for right now they have played a bunch of shitty teams in the playoffs. They haven't played anyone good, and their fans are treating them like this is the best basketball team that's ever graced us by tying up their laces, you know, and that other series in the West is going to go, at least another game, maybe seven. That the finals don't start till Wednesday, and that is just too many days of listening to New York Knicks fans tell me how amazing Jalen Brunson is, and that Carl Anthony Towns is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and OG fucking whatever. So you haven't won anything yet. I get it. It's the first time in like 27 years you made the finals. But you know what? Nobody gives a shit about conference champion banners. Win it all.
Yeah. Correct. Well, I actually have a decent reason to hate the Knicks. The music company that I worked for
Mm.
previously in Los Angeles, they
Charles Dolan.
yes, they managed and only because he was the owner of the Knicks, we managed major A-list artists like Janet Jackson, the Eagles, Neil Diamond, Christina Aguilera. Like, the company I worked for managed all these artists. And we also happened to manage JD and the Straight Shots. JD and the Straight Shots was Jim Dolan's band. Jim Dolan's band was the Eagles' backup band, and it was the worst blues music you would ever hear. And the only reason anyone showed up to watch him play at sold out shows at the Roxy were because they worked for the guy. And after spending a number of nights sitting and being forced to listen through that, I grew to absolutely hate Jim Dolan and anything that he touched. So I will I'm like, if you can't even produce mediocre blues music with the Eagles as your backup band, you should not be playing music. And I am very anti-Knicks as a result of everything that James Dolan does as a
Well,
human.
James Dolan is a unique turd also. Just
Yeah,
The
he's
whole
also
Isaiah
historically
Thomas
a piece of
thing,
yes.
he's a complete piece of shit. I mean,
Yes.
Isaiah Thomas and sexual assault, and now he's like secretly recording. It came out that he was secretly recording a woman who they believed to be who was trans, who was a big fan, who was doing nothing wrong. They were like they had the cameras following her around the stadium. They had minute by minute reports of what she was doing in security briefings. Like he
Yeah.
is just a complete piece of shit. Uh, I will give it to the Knicks fans. Like they, I don't know if you watched Game 1 when they came
Oh,
back, that big comeback.
that was the
The
most
fans are on it in the game. They are on it, and it's a hard place to play. But one of my friends had the other night, he was like, I regret not driving 7 hours to see this game. And I've been up all night listening to Inside the NBA. This is like the greatest moment of my life. And then just shut the fuck up. Oh my God. I think they're going to get stomped. I hope they get stomped. And then it's just like, what was all that for?
correct. Well, which is most likely going to happen. But I will also say that if you're rooting when the playoffs hit, any team that has James Harden on it is going to get crushed in the playoffs at some point.
God,
so
he was so bad.
The Cavaliers just got. I've been a Rockets fan and a Clippers fan, and I've watched it happen a number of times. And so, like, don't get too excited, New York, because you have two teams in the West that are going to be a much more formidable foe than the ones that
James Harden looked like a beat up Volkswagen Beetle from like 1965 that hasn't been restored or made in any way interesting. It's just belching exhaust all over the court. He was awful. Every time he had the ball, it's like, oh my God, this is going to end poorly. And it always did.
Always did. See, James Harden has made a career out of being the best player in non-important games ever. And as soon as the games matter in any way, like, dude, a game 1 or game 2 of a playoff series, James Harden will give you 45 and go off. In a game 7, he's going to go 0 for 25 and with 11 turnovers. So it just
he's been doing it for like 7 straight years, 8 straight years, just massive chokes in the playoffs when it matters.
2 years. Him and CP3 are the worst and when it comes to all this. So, all right, well, what are we talking about next week, Owen?
Still have no idea. I never think about that. I do my fire hose and
I ask you every week this question. And I'm always surprised at who your shut the fuck up is. So I think you need to bring a little more to the table when it comes to what we're talking about next week.
Next week?
Well, we'll figure it out. In the meantime, for all those who made it this far into the podcast, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you all.